Hi, I'm Tom Lopatosky, proprietor of Lopco Contracting. Today we're going to talk about lead paint. Let's go. We haven't even got to this particular portion of the house yet, and you can see all the paint chips that have just naturally fallen to the ground over a period of time. Now can pretty much guarantee that there's a bit of lead mixed in here. Just because of the age of the house. This is way pre-78, and the thing that you always have to be cognizant when talking about lead paint is you're not necessarily always concerned about the surface layer, although in this particular case there may be lead present on the surface. What you have to be concerned about is what's in the substrate and working with the substrate, because even if the top layers test negative for lead, that doesn't mean that the wood fibers don't contain a certain percentage of lead paint that may have been used quite some time ago. Now, how we would prepare this, every state has different regulations in terms of what has to be done for dealing with lead paint. The EPA sets forth certain standards. There's a law out there called the RRP rule, where everybody that works with it these days has to have a license to be able to work with this particular type of issue. Now, one of the EPA rules is that if your state's laws supersede that of the federal government, in other words, if they're more stringent than the federal government, the state's laws therefore supersede the law of the federal government. So it's a little confusing, but basically whichever law is more protective of the consumer and the environment and people in general, those are the laws that take precedence. Now we're in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and in Rhode Island, the Rhode Island laws actually supersede those of the federal government. So when we approach a house like this, we abide by their laws versus the federal level, and the state of Rhode Island actually oversees all the lead paint operations in terms of the implementation of the RRP rule versus the EPA. So long story short, anything that we do with this particular substrate to address the lead issue falls under the guidelines of the state of Rhode Island. Now, that being said, what do we have to do with the lead? There's a number of things that we have to do. Just some really quick tidbits. Us as contractors, what we have to do is anybody that lives within 50 feet of an area that we're working with lead has to receive a notification that we're going to be working with the lead. Another example of actually doing the work. When we do get to this site and we are preparing this site, we have to make sure that plastic is extended from the foundation all the way out as far as we can get it where any chips may fall. Now obviously if we're scraping 10 feet down, the plastic doesn't have to go as far back as if we're 20 or 30 feet up in the air. There it has to go a little bit further back. But in any case, you got to make sure that the ground is properly protected. When we're scraping, we don't dry scrape this. In other words, we don't just take a scraper and just go to town on it. With lead, although the lead chips aren't good, what's worse than the chips are the dust that's associated with the work. So what we have to do when we scrape it is we wet scrape it. Now that's done a couple of different ways. You can mist it down with a garden hose before you keep scraping, and you just got to make sure that they stay moist so the dust level keeps contained. Or we take spray bottles and we actually mist it down as we're going on the ladders just to keep the levels down. There are a number of other rules, etc., that we abide by when we're doing this. It's very important that whoever does do the work, wherever lead is present, on the inside or the outside of the home, that they do have the RRP license to be able to do that. If they don't have the license, then they should not be nowhere near working on your home if it's pre-1978. The way that we typically approach a home that we know is built before 1978, even if the customers tell us that there's no lead on it, is we approach it as if there is lead on it. Because even though it may appear, or they may think that there's no lead, because something's been encapsulated for a while, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not lead there and that we're not going to run across it at some point during the project. So instead of going through the extent and expense of testing every single surface that may have paint on it that was painted prior to the time that we were there, which is required under the RRP rule, we just treat it as lead from the get-go, and we're very much protected, and we know that on our end, if there is any lead, that it's going to be treated the right way.